me ask you a question. Would you say that you are a liar? And right now you're like, no way, I'm not a liar. Are you sure? Because I think we're surrounded by so many things that could technically be classified as lying that those things could possibly bleed over into our lives. For example, is false advertising lying? I'm going to go with a yes on that one. That is definitely a lie. Okay, almost all of advertising is probably a lie, to be honest. What about magic tricks? Aren't magic tricks technically lying? Okay, so I don't think anybody was fooled on that one, but technically, aren't you trying to fool somebody? And fooling somebody could be counted as lying? And if that's the case, are Spanx or ladies' compression underwear, are they counted as lying? I mean, isn't the goal really to fool everybody about your body shape? What about pranks? Could pranks be considered lying?
Well, agora vamos enganar minha mãe, vó.
Vamos.
Ela tá na louça ali, tu vai jogar nela.
Ei, oi. Não caiu muita água, Gabriel.
Okay, they may be funny, but technically, aren't they lying? What about TikTok filters? I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are appearing to be much more attractive than they actually are. Is that lying? What about cheating on a board game? Is that lying? Holding a fish closer to the camera to make it appear larger. Is that lying? Exaggerating on Facebook. Is that lying? Using the handicapped restroom. Isn't that kind of lying? Maybe we all are a big bunch of liars and we didn't even know it. And that's a bad thing because we know that God clearly is not a fan of lying. I mean, he talks about it quite a few times in the Bible, in places like Proverbs 12:22. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. And in Psalm 34:13, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. I mean, even one of the 10 Commandments is Deuteronomy 5:20. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. In other words, you shall not lie. God is against lying. Yeah, but what about joking around? What about half-truths? What about little white lies? What if I'm lying for someone's own good? What if telling the truth would be hurtful? What if I'm planning on telling them another time, not right this second? What if it's made up for the joy of a little kid? Is that lying too? I mean, are they all okay? Or do we have to stop all of those? Because if we're classifying lying as any time that truth is not coming out of our mouths or out of our bodies, then I feel like all of those could technically be considered lying. You know, back in Jesus' day, the people were faced with a similar conundrum. And Jesus addresses this conundrum in the Sermon on the Mount. In one of the sections of the Sermon on the Mount, it's a very short section, he's talking about oaths. No, not oats. No, not the disgusting thing that they make oatmeal out of.
Hi. Are you going to try Mommy's homemade baby food? It's right here. You want to try it?
Oh, yeah, I agree with that, baby. I don't know how anybody can eat that stuff. Oaths. 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 Now, oaths back then are like us making promises or swearing. I'm not talking about the swearing that gets your mouth washed out with soap. I'm talking about the swearing that something is true. Now, that's what oaths were like back then, and those were something that were often taken in the Old Testament, and they were to be treated as serious. You can see sections like Numbers 32. It says, when a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word. He must do everything he said. Yes, oaths were a solemn promise. It was a promise that was made to God and sometimes to man in honor of God, which really solidified in the people's minds that this was something pretty serious and not something to be trifled with. They weren't used all the time, but in those rare instances when they were used, you knew that this person was going to do everything within their power to accomplish whatever was promised. In modern day times, we still take oaths, like if you're sworn into the witness stand. We also give oaths when we say things like, I swear on my mother's grave. Well, not that I'm trying to put my mother in a grave early. Sorry about that, Mom. Nowadays, we don't use oaths as much as we used to, but we have kind of substituted them with promises. We don't swear by stuff, but we will say, I promise I'll be there, or I promise that I'll do that, or I promise I won't do that. And you definitely have to be careful with what you promise. They're pretty serious.
Okay, you ready? I promise Daddy I will not have boyfriend.
No.
Why?
Yep, gotta be careful. But seriously, when you stop and think about it, what good is a promise, really? I mean, Terry and I, we like to watch real-life cop shows. So, you know, a show where they're telling you about how this happened and how they figured it out. And the cops will be interviewing a suspect. And that suspect, they will swear, they will promise up and down on anything that they can think of that they didn't do anything wrong, only to confess later that it was them. And I always think that they should spend a little bit of extra time in prison just for breaking their promise. There's a saying that says, a man is only as good as his word. And if that's true, I've experienced a lot of people in my life that are no good. Because people break their word over and over and over again and really don't think twice about it. It's just a normal day for them. Back in Jesus' day, oaths were having a similar kind of problem. You see, oaths had been intended to be a solemn promise, but as people tend to do, they started with something holy and turned it into something ritual. Once again, they took relationship and turned it into religion. You see, in the beginning, oaths were sworn to God and taken as something very serious, but as time went on, oaths were tweaked a little bit. You see, to make an oath to God and then to break it, well, that was some pretty serious stuff that people would not take too kindly to. So people started to tweak the oath so that they would have a way out just in case they needed it. So instead of making an oath to God, they would swear by God's throne. I swear by the throne of God that I will pay you rent for your building. And then if they broke it, they could say, I changed my mind, and I didn't really swear to God anyway, I just swore to where he sits. Not that big a deal. It'd be like me saying, I swear to my grandmother's tombstone. And when I broke my promise, I could say, well, I didn't swear to her dead body. I just swore to her grave marker. That's really just a piece of stone. Yeah, so you had all of these people who were going around making promises that they could get out of on a technicality if they needed to. Well, isn't that awesome? Anybody back then could promise anything that they wanted to, and it sounded like they genuinely meant it, but then you would have to pull out a magnifying glass and really take a close look to see what exactly they were swearing by, and try to decide whether or not it actually meant anything to them. And the Pharisees, of course, were the worst of them all, because as being teachers of the law, they were the authorities on this subject. So not only were they making false oaths, but they were responsible in deciding if someone else was to be held accountable for their oath. So a person could say, I swear by God's sandals that you will have your money in 10 days. And then after 10 days was up, the person could say, I only swore by God's sandals, so that's not technically an oath. And then they would go to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees would decide whether or not God's sandals made a binding oath. That is stupid. And that is why in Matthew 23, Jesus is yelling at the Pharisees for this very subject. And he says, woe to you, blind guides. You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools! You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone who swears by the gift on the altar is bound by that oath. How ridiculous this must have been back then. Just absolutely ridiculous. You just want to get an honest promise out of somebody, and all you get is the runaround. You know, sometimes I think of Pharisees are the way that we look at modern-day politicians. A lot of times when a politician talks, everybody assumes that everything they're saying is coming out the side of their mouth because their only motivation is to get in office or stay in office. A busload of politicians, they were driving down a country road when the bus suddenly ran off the road and crashed into an old farmer's field. Well, the old farmer, he heard the giant crash, so he rushed over to investigate, and then he began digging a large hole to bury all the politicians. Well, a few hours later, the local sheriff was driving past the farmer's field, and he noticed the bus wreck, and he approached the old farmer and asked where all the politicians had gone, and the old farmer explained that he'd gone ahead and buried them all. Were they all dead? Asked the puzzled sheriff, and the old farmer replied, well, some of them said they weren't, but you know how them politicians lie. Yes, nobody wants to be known as that person that lies all the time, do they? But that's what these oaths were doing to the Jewish population of the day. Some of them were walking around making these oaths and then not keeping them, and because of this, the trust that they had for each other was completely eroding. And that's why later in Matthew, as well as in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is trying to help the people understand what they've got wrong on this one. Matthew 5:33, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Basically, it says, guys, don't swear an oath at all, and I don't care what it is you're swearing to, because if you're swearing an oath, remember that God made everything. Everything. So no matter what you're swearing to, God created it, so it should be kept no matter what. So don't even bother swearing to anything or making oaths to anything. Well, then what are we supposed to do? Verse 37. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Or maybe you've heard it in the past. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. What Jesus is inferring is that if you live a life of truth, then you won't ever have to take an oath. And I hate to say it, but if you are someone that says, I promise, or I swear, to get people to believe you, then you're probably not living a life of truth. What does it mean to live a life of truth? Does that mean that you have to avoid all of those things we talked about? No telling kids fun stories. No saying dinner was good when you hated it. Only brutally honest answers to, does this outfit make me look fat? No hair dye, no just for men, no compression pantyhose, and guys, no sucking it in all night because we don't need compression pantyhose. Yeah, what does it mean? Does it mean that we should watch each other like hawks so that we can call each other out on all these little lies that we tell? No, this is exactly where the Israelites went wrong. They chose religion over relationship. They made a set of rules to be legalistically followed and then left out other ones so that they could use them to their advantage. No one would have described these people as people of truth. They would never have called them people who lived a life of truth. You see, someone who lives a life of truth, they're not hyper-focused on following a set of rules. Well, what are they all about? They're about being people of their word. They're about saying things only if they mean them. They're about following through with the things that they say. They're about being proven to be trustworthy time and time again. They are about admitting mistakes, even when a lie would be easier. And honestly, they're all about loving God and loving people, because part of that includes not wanting to lie to either. You see, when you live a life of love, you will always be looking out for others, and sometimes speaking truth, and other times holding your tongue. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't also unnecessarily blurt out hurtful things just because they're arguably true. Do I think we're liars? I don't think we're liars. But could we be even better at being men and women of truth? Oh, absolutely. And the easiest way to do it? Love God. Love people. Which happens to be pretty much the answer to everything, doesn't it? Relationship over religion every single time. Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that people can trust every word that comes out of your mouth. I pray that that is the kind of people we are. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. God bless. Hope to see you soon.